Hello and welcome. You're on VITV with Into Vietnam Weekend Edition, which provides you with the most comprehensive and in-depth views of Vietnam's economy in the past 7 days. Top stories of the week. Local banks forecast 2014 inflation to stay below 7% in 2014. The United States Secretary of State John Kerry visits Vietnam. The meaning of the United States Secretary of State visit to Vietnam, as well as of the TPP trade pact, will be made clear in this week's business talk. It's joined by Mr. Adam Sitkoff, Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce in Vietnam, or AmCham. Let's begin with this week's figure.
Results of a recent survey by the State Bank of Vietnam (SBV) showed that domestic credit institutions expected that inflation in 2014 will be around 6.74%, and in December, CPI will increase about 0.62%. However, Vietnamese Bank believes that Vietnam should be wary of a number of factors putting pressure on inflation. In particular, the adjustments of the prices of commodities managed by the state can make the most influence. Besides, if the budget deficit is relaxed from 4.8% of GDP to 5.3% of GDP, plus the release of additional bonds, the policy-making agency will face tremendous pressure to balance the controlling inflation target. According to the Ministry of Construction, as of mid-December, total amount disbursed under the 30 trillion dong housing development package were only 555 billion dong in 1,654 billion Vietnam dong committed, less than 2% of total capital. In which loan agreements have been signed with 11 businesses with value of 1,127 billion Vietnam dong. Of these, 6 businesses have been disbursed with 205 billion Vietnam dong. Credit institutions also have made loan commitments to 1,450 individual customers with 527 billion Vietnam dong, in which they have disbursed 1,436 customers with outstanding loans of 350 billion Vietnam dong. According to the government's planning for 2030, which envisions development till 2050, Hanoi will have 33 industrial zones and high-tech parks. The city currently has 19 industrial zones and high-tech parks, which have been improved by the Prime Minister. 8 zones falling under the city have a filling rate of 95%, 5 others have been under construction, while the 5 remaining zones have been listed under the list of industrial zone planning by 2020. The Municipal People's Committee has asked the Industrial Zone and Processing Zones Management Board to conduct surveys and collect planning results for the city's districts and report them to the government next year.
Coming up next is some major macroeconomic and investment news. The U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry arrived in Hanoi on Sunday after visiting the Mekong Delta. On Sunday, he announced a commitment of $17 million from the U.S. to help Vietnamese communities suffering from the effects of climate change. The visit is a valuable chance for both sides to discuss ways to improve the strategic cooperation relation, deepen the mutual relationship, and international issues of mutual interest. 4 issues were high on the agenda during the U.S. Secretary of State visit: their education and training, trade, environmental cooperation and climate change, and regional security enhancement. The U.S. Secretary of State affirms the huge potential of cooperation between Vietnam and the United States, which were agreed on by the Vietnam's Minister of Foreign Affairs Phạm Bình Minh, who says economic trade and investment tie has been the pillar in the Vietnam-U.S. relation since the two countries decided to normalize their relation. Minister Phạm Bình Minh also revealed two-way trade between Vietnam and the United States increased 50-fold from $450 million in 1995 to $25 billion in 2012, making the U.S. among top 7 foreign investors in Vietnam. Mr. Kerry says once the TPP agreement is reached, the trade relation will be brought to a new height. TPP will have Vietnam have competition advantage, create high-speed economic growth, and generate more jobs. Kerry's visit to Vietnam comes as the United States tried to reach a trade deal with 11 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, including Vietnam. A Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Pact is the centerpiece of U.S. efforts to refocus attention on the fast-growing Asia-Pacific region. Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng pressed for more drastic actions to restructure the credit organization system for 2011-2015 period. He asked the banking sector to do all it can following monetary and fiscal policies to keep next year inflation at 6.5 to 7%. Prime Minister Nguyễn Tấn Dũng reviewed, assessed and assigned tasks for restructuring and putting an end to cross-holding in the banking sector. Regarding bank reforms, the government leader urged local banks to improve their conditions by following the restructuring plans. In details, healthy banks are recommended to increase their influence on the economy and contribute a bigger part to the national economic development. The proportion of equity in state commercial banks should be increased so that the government only holds 55% at most in the lenders. The Vietnamese Prime Minister stressed the key role of clearing bad debts in bank reform process. Commercial banks should strive to resolve the problem, while the Vietnam Asset Management Company is urged to boost the purchase of non-performing loans in order to create a stronger banking system, ensure its liquidity, and helps to boost economic growth. The leader also reviewed non-performing loan ratio reported at 4.6% by the State Bank of Vietnam, but the actual rate might be as much as 8%, while the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank both say it might be 7%. He says it's hard to bring the level to around 2 to 3%, and hence tremendous efforts are required from the banking sector. Concerning the issue of cross-ownership, which was mainly attributed to the bad condition of the banking industry, the Prime Minister says this issue requires aggressive measures like regulatory documents to prevent shareholders from withdrawing their shares in commercial banks. Notably, he proposed joint stock commercial banks have to be listed on the stock markets and their operations must be publicized to eliminate cross-holding. Moody's Investor Service says in its annual report, stable outlook for the rating of government bonds B2 of Vietnam reflects the stability of macroeconomy and initial progresses in the process of restructuring the banking system. Based on the method of rating national bonds, Moody's evaluated the Vietnam's economic strength is at a moderate level, organizational power is at a very low level, financial strength is at moderate level, and vulnerable level with risk is high. Moody's says the Vietnam GDP has been recovered out of low levels set last year. Besides, inflation has been stable and external payments position have improved. Especially export growth had contributed to recovering current account balance and payment balance in general. As a result, foreign currency reserves have reached nearly the highest level for many years. Moreover, stable exchange rate has contributed to inflation control over the past 2 years. The biggest credibility challenge for Vietnam related to hidden risk of the banking system and state-owned enterprises. Although the government's direct debts for these two sectors are moderate, expansion of the balance sheet of state-owned enterprises in the past decade partly came from rapid growth in the country that leads to the greater debt burden for the public sector. Yet, Moody's report says Vietnam has made progress in restructuring the banking system, on the risk leading to credit rating decrease to the B2 level in December the 9th have not completely disappeared. Figures from the State Bank of Vietnam showed total non-performing loans handled and put out balance sheet for tracking in 2012 and the first 10 months of 2013 was 105.9 trillion dong. Regarding handling non-performing loans, as of December the 16th, the Vietnam Asset Management Company has bought nearly 28.17 trillion dong in book value with purchase value of 22.86 trillion dong from 26 credit institutions. In 2012 and the first 10 months of 2013, credit institutions have put aside risk provisions for non-performing loan, handling resources, and proactively handled a large volume of non-performing loans by provisions, with the total non-performing loans handled and put out of balance sheets for tracking of 105.9 trillion dong. By the end of October 2013, the total balance of debts restructured and kept in the same group under Decision 780 were 316.8 trillion dong. The State Bank of Vietnam says this contributes to support businesses to access bank loans with reasonable interest rate while reducing the burdens of paying overdue interest. At the 2013 Commercial Council Conference, Minister of Industry and Trade Vũ Huy Hoàng says Vietnam's Index of Industrial Production, or IIP, is likely to rise by 5.6% this year, mainly thanks to growth of the manufacturing and processing sector. If the forecast comes true, the growth is higher than 4.8% rise of 2012. The proportion of industrial processing and manufacturing has increased to 78% in 2013 from 60.2% in 2010. Stock price in processing and manufacturing sector has gradually increased. The General Statistics Office says in the website, November 2013 IIP were estimated to increase by 5.7% on year, driven by water supply, sewage and waste management. In details, processing and manufacturing sector increased by 8.4% from a year earlier. Production and distribution of electricity sector jumped by 8.2%, and water supply, sewage and waste management soared by 9.8%, but the mining and quarrying sector fell by 4.2% on year this month. In January-November period, Vietnam's IIP increased by 5.6% on year, in which water supply, sewage, waste management industry recorded the highest IIP increase with 9.2% on year, followed by production and distribution of electricity sector jumped by 8.6%, processing and manufacturing sector 7.1%, while mining and quarrying sector increased by 0.5%. Some industry posted high year-on-year IIP increase in the period. Our garment and textile industry, production of leather and related products, production of prefabricated metal products, production of motor vehicles, production of costumes, and production of electrical equipments. Some industry posted low on-year IIP growth or IIP on-year decrease in the period. Tobacco production, production of electronics, computers and optical, food manufacturing and processing, exploiting of crude oil and natural gas, exploiting of hard coal and lignite, and metal production. The Ministry of Finance has announced the state budget plans for 2014. State budget collection and expenditure in the year are set to be at around 782.7 trillion dong, in which domestic budget collection will hit 539 trillion dong, and that from crude oil 85.2 trillion dong. Import and export activities are estimated to contribute 154 trillion dong to state budget and 4.5 trillion dong from Official Assistance for Development or ODA for Vietnam. The Ministry of Finance says budget expenditure next year will hit more than 1,000 trillion dong. Investment for development will account for 163 trillion dong, for funding as 120 trillion dong, for socio-economic development, national security, and administrative management expenditure will take up 700 trillion dong. The ministry also says state budget deficit will stand at 224 trillion dong, equivalent to 5.3% of GDP. And foreign trade news, we continue the program.
According to the latest statistics from the Vietnam General Department of Customs, Japan has rapidly become Vietnam's key market, accounting for 10% of Vietnam's total export turnover. During the last 11 months, two-way trade turnover between Vietnam and Japan were estimated at $22.94 billion, up 1.7% against same period last year. Vietnam's Japanese exports were valued at $12.37 billion, a year-on-year increase of 3.5%, while the country imported Japanese goods worth $10.57 billion, down 0.3% from the previous year. Vietnam has enjoyed trade surplus from Japan for several consecutive years, with export surplus reaching $0.4 billion in 2011, $1.5 billion in 2012, and $1.8 billion so far this year. By November 2013, Japan ranked the fourth among Vietnam's largest trade partners. The two countries have posted an annual trade growth of around 17% since 2005, with bilateral trade turnover increasing from $8.5 billion in 2005 to $16.8 billion 5 years later. The data from the Vietnam Food Association or VFA shows that Vietnam is estimated to ship 102,700 tons of rice with $51.5 million FOB price in the first 12 days of December. In January the 1st December the 12th period, the country has shipped a total of 6.2 million tons of rice, worth $2.7 million. The VFA forecasts that the quantity of rice exported in 2013 fallen by 1.12 million tons compared to last year, equivalent to 14.5%.
Ranking the first in the world in terms of volume, but the price and business results of the Vietnamese cashew industry are falling down. As at the beginning of the fourth quarter 2013, the total cashew exports hit 212,000 tons, up 15% on year, but the volume went up, but the price went down, causing much lower revenue for this sector. Therefore, the solutions for the sustainable development of Vietnamese cashew sector are of great concerns.
According to statistics by the Vietnam Cashew Association, from 2007 to present, the cashew cultivation areas have kept declining from 440,000 hectares in 2007 to the current area of only about 360,000 hectares. From a country with the biggest cashew cultivation area and volume in the world, Vietnam is now ranking the third and facing the risk of falling to the fourth position after India, Ivory Coast and Brazil.
Giá mua hạt điều của nông dân trong những năm gần đây thì chúng tôi cũng cho rằng nó cũng quá bấp bênh và nó cũng tức là không ổn định đấy. Và nói chung là nó cũng không công bằng với người nông dân. Giá hạt điều thì cũng không phải một mình một chợ, nó cũng liên quan đến giá các loại hạt khác và nó hoàn toàn do cái thị trường của người mua người ta quyết định. Mấy năm nay thì cái nguồn nguyên liệu nhập về từ bên ngoài thì với cái giá nó cũng rất là hấp dẫn đối với cái việc chế biến và xuất khẩu. Cho nên là mọi người cũng quan tâm đến cái nhập khẩu. Tất nhiên là người ta cũng không bỏ cái thị trường trong nước.
In the past, the Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development warned that the biggest challenge for the cashew industry is the risk of importing up to 50% of materials for processing, lowering the added values. If domestic production is kept stable and farmers make profits, the cashew sector will develop sustainably, recovering the first position of Vietnam in the world in producing cashew.
Vẫn phải nhập khẩu nguyên liệu điều thô 50% về để mà chúng ta là chế biến xuất khẩu, còn trong nước chúng ta mới đáp ứng được là đủ nguyên liệu 50%. Thế thì cái mà 1,5 tỷ đó thì thực chất là chúng ta phần trong nước chúng ta làm ra giá trị tăng thêm và chúng ta được hưởng toàn bộ thì khoảng một nửa đó thôi. Còn nước kia thì chúng ta phải là mua điều thô rồi chúng ta lại gia công chế biến rồi chúng ta xuất khẩu lại. Thì cái sự gia tăng cái nửa sau đấy rất là thấp và chúng ta thật ra cũng là những nhà máy, nếu mà nói theo cái kiểu là cũng là gia công, làm nông nghiệp gia công làm thêm thôi, chứ cái giá trị tăng thêm là ít. Thế thì bây giờ chúng ta suy nghĩ làm thế nào để mà chúng ta tăng được là cái mà chúng ta sản xuất trong nước, hoặc là trực tiếp các doanh nghiệp chúng ta đầu tư nước ngoài để chúng ta tăng thêm cái giá trị được tạo ra như thế.
Experts say it's difficult to build cashew material areas because in the past it was considered as a tree for hunger elimination and poverty reduction. At present, when Vietnamese farmers have capital and better knowledge, they will choose other trees with higher economic efficiency. Hence, in the coming term, the area and volume of Vietnamese cashew will stay still. Meanwhile, the area of cashew cultivation in Africa is expanding, boosting the volume of material supply from Africa and is the pressure for Vietnamese cashew.
Muốn mà ổn định được cái ngành điều của Việt Nam, theo tôi là chỉ là cái vấn đề mà áp dụng khoa học kỹ thuật để mà tăng năng suất cây điều lên. Thì khi mà một cái sản lượng trên 1 hectare mà tăng lên thì người nông dân sẽ so sánh đối với những cây khác, người ta sẽ giữ hoặc là trồng tiếp những cây điều.
It is targeted that from 2013 to 2015, the processed cashew volume of Vietnam will reach 2.4 million tons, in which imported raw cashew materials will be 1.5 million tons. Domestic cashew net volume will hit 900,000 tons, and the rate of importing raw cashew will be 62.5%. To achieve these targets, the cashew sector is boosting the planning of materials areas, applying science and technology into production. At the same time, localities need to well plan the cultivation areas. In this way, cashew growers can raise their income and the cashew material areas can be maintained, ensuring the sustainable development of the cashew sector.
In a bid to foster trade and security ties between Vietnam and the United States, the U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry began his 3-day visit to Vietnam. Kerry's visit to Vietnam comes as the United States tried to reach a trade deal with 11 countries in the Asia-Pacific region, including Vietnam. VITV reporter had a talk with Mr. Adam Sitkoff, Executive Director of the American Chamber of Commerce, or AmCham, to know more about the meaning of the visit, as well as the TPP for both sides.
Thank you so much for your conversation today.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
What is the main focus of this trip to Vietnam of Mr. John Kerry?
Well, I want to start off by saying first, I think it's great that secretaries come into Vietnam. As a lot of your viewers know, Secretary Kerry was one of the people most instrumental in repairing the relationship between Vietnam and the United States after the wartime period. And John Kerry hasn't been to Vietnam in about 15 years. So this is his first trip back in a long time and his first trip here as the U.S. Secretary of State. I think he's coming here to show that the United States cares a lot about strengthening its partnership with Vietnam, it cares about Vietnam's place in ASEAN and the region as a whole. It cares about economic ties, educational ties, security ties, and strategic ties. And so I think his trip here is very important.
Would you please share some more about the trade relationship between U.S. and Vietnam in recent years?
Well, it started quite small, as you know, and it's grown tremendously to over $25 billion. There are a lot of things being made in Vietnam and being shipped and sold in the United States. Not enough things that are made in America coming over here and being sold to Vietnam. But the trade relationship has grown, the investment relationship has grown, and what our AmCham members on the ground here want to see is a business and economic climate that is better, that has more certainty, that makes people feel comfortable that this is a place you can come and invest and do well. The Trans-Pacific Partnership as the next great opportunity for Vietnam, because that's going to change how rules are made and how companies behave, and it's important. And so the trade relationship has grown tremendously, and now to take it to that next level is we need TPP and a strong TPP.
So what can you say about the outlook of the TPP negotiations in 2014?
Well, look, they've already scheduled a new round that's going to take place towards the end of January. They're going to keep going. Calendars for trade agreements are tough. The political environment in the United States for trade is always complicated. The same people in these countries that are negotiating TPP also have other things to negotiate. In Vietnam, they're negotiating the Vietnam-EU agreement. There's other things in ASEAN. There's the RCEP agreement. Everybody's only has so many hours in the day. The U.S. negotiating team wants to work on the U.S.-EU agreement. So there's a lot of people that would like to wrap this up, but people recognize that the issues that are not yet that aren't done yet, those are the tough ones. And so what I think the outlook is the outlook's positive. The people can get this done, and TPP is going to get done. The challenge is to make sure that the talking doesn't continue so long that people just start thinking here or thinking there and they lose focus. And we've seen that in the WTO. We saw that in the Doha round. Eventually, if you just talk and never conclude something, people will lose interest and focus on something else. And because of the WTO, that's why we've seen so many bilateral and regional trade agreements, because the WTO agreement didn't work. And so the challenge for the TPP negotiators is to make sure this works and make sure it works quickly.
What can you say about the role of Vietnam and U.S. in TPP negotiations?
Well, TPP is 12 countries. Vietnam's one and the U.S. is one, so I think their role is big. Vietnam has the things that it wants to get out of TPP, and a lot of those are aimed specifically at the United States on market access. And we, in my position, I try to convince let the American negotiators know repeatedly that trade is a two-way street, that we can't just ask Vietnam to reform everything and to open everything and do what we want unless we're going to let Vietnam sell the things that it wants in the United States. And I think that Vietnam and the U.S., to answer your question, are very significant in TPP. Obviously, this is an American-led agreement. There's 12 countries, but the U.S. has driven the process mostly. And the U.S. has probably the most difficult positions on a lot of things. But the negotiations are doing well. The negotiators are going to come together, and at the political level, they'll solve these issues. At the end of every trade agreement, somebody's got to sit down, shake hands, talk like we're talking, and say, what does it take to get this done? Let's get this done. Let's make a deal. And so we'll see that happen.
Thank you so much for your conversation.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.
As usual, the final pass is the summary of the local securities market in the past 7 days. And that's all for now. Thank you so much for your attention. For comments and feedbacks, you can reach us by email at intovietnam@vitv.vn or give us a call at 0422208288. Goodbye for now.